The desert wind carried more than dust that September afternoon when Caleb Carter rode into Dust Rock. It carried the smell of alkali and sage, the distant memory of rain that hadn't blessed this corner of Nevada in 3 months. And something else, that peculiar scent of a town holding its breath. His mare, a sturdy roan named Belle, picked her way down the main street with the careful steps of a horse that had traversed too many hostile territories to trust any ground at first sight. Caleb pulled his weathered hat lower against the slanting sun, aware of the eyes tracking him from doorways and windows. In a town like Dust Rock, strangers were either opportunity or trouble, rarely anything in between. The leather of his saddle creaked as he shifted, a sound that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat over the years of drifting from one forsaken place to another. The town itself seemed carved from the surrounding landscape, buildings of sun-bleached wood and adobe that looked as if they'd grown from the red earth rather than been built upon it. False-fronted stores lined the street. Garrett's General Goods, the Dust Rock Gazette, Murphy's Undertaking and Fine Furniture. Each establishment bore the scars of sandstorms and the relentless Nevada sun. Their painted signs faded to suggestions of their former glory. It was the Lucky Strike saloon that drew him, not for the promise of whiskey, though Lord knew his throat was parched enough, but for the information that flowed as freely as liquor in such establishments. He tied Belle to the hitching post, noting the 3 other horses there, all bearing the distinctive brand of the Garrison Ranch. Working men's horses, not the fancy stock of mine owners or cattle barons. The saloon's bat-wing doors protested on rusty hinges as he pushed through. Inside, the afternoon light struggled through grimy windows, casting long shadows across scarred wooden floors. The air hung thick with tobacco smoke and the sour, sweet smell of spilled beer. 3 men huddled at the bar turned to assess him with the quick, measuring glances of those who'd learned to size up trouble before it sized up them. Behind the bar stood a woman who immediately commanded attention, not through any deliberate action, but through the quiet authority with which she polished a glass. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical bun, revealing a face that might have been called beautiful if not for the wariness that sharpened her green eyes. This, Caleb would soon learn, was Evelyn Morrison, proprietor of the Lucky Strike and keeper of more secrets than a priest's confessional. "Afternoon," Caleb said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice came out rougher than intended, scraped raw by trail dust and disuse. Evelyn set down the glass with deliberate precision. "Stranger, what'll it be?" "Whiskey and information. If you're selling—" A bitter smile touched her lips. "Whiskey's 2 bits. Information depends on what you're asking." He laid a silver dollar on the bar, the last of his traveling money save for the $10 sewn into his saddle blanket. "I heard tell there's a mine for sale. The old Garrison silver." The 3 men at the bar stiffened almost imperceptibly. One of them, a grizzled fellow with arms like tree trunks, turned to face Caleb fully. "You heard wrong, friend. That mine ain't for sale. It's cursed." "Tom, that's enough," Evelyn said quietly, but there was steel in her voice. "No, Evie, it ain't enough." Tom's weathered face darkened. "We've buried 6 men on account of that hellhole. Good men, with families. Last fellow who went down there came up speaking in tongues before his heart gave out. That mine's got the devil's own fire burning beneath it." The other 2 men nodded agreement, their faces grave. Caleb noticed one of them unconsciously touched a small cross hanging from his neck. "Every mine has its stories," Caleb said evenly. "Usually means there's still silver down there that someone doesn't want found." "This ain't about silver," the 3rd man spoke up, younger than the others with the calloused hands of a miner. "My brother Samuel went down there 2 years back, never came up. Search party found his lantern at the bottom of shaft 3, still burning. No sign of Sam. How do you explain a lantern burning for 3 days with no one to tend it?" Evelyn poured Caleb's whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light. "The mine's been sealed since the last accident. Judge Morrison, my late husband, had it closed by court order, but the deed holder, old Marcus Garrison, died last month. His son wants nothing to do with it. Says he'll take $10 just to be rid of the curse on his family name. $10, Caleb repeated, sipping the whiskey. It burned, but it was a good burn, washing away the trail dust. Seems a man would be a fool not to investigate such a bargain. Seems a man would be a fool to throw away his life for pride and $10, Tom countered. The saloon door swung open, admitting a slice of harsh sunlight and a man who wore authority like a well-tailored coat. Sheriff, by the star on his vest, with the soft look of someone who'd been eating better than most in Dust Rock, his pale blue eyes fixed on Caleb with the instant suspicion lawmen reserved for drifters. Afternoon. Evie, boys. His gaze never left Caleb. Don't believe I've had the pleasure. Stranger, name's Sheriff Dandridge. We run a peaceful town here. Caleb Carter, just passing through. Funny thing about men passing through. Sometimes they get ideas about staying. Sometimes they get ideas about that cursed mine up on Garrison Hill. The sheriff's hand rested casual-like on his pistol. I'd hate to see another good man die for nothing. Or worse, stir up troubles better left buried. There was weight to that last phrase. Caleb noted. Troubles buried. Not silver, not bodies. Troubles. I appreciate your concern. Sheriff, man's got to make his own choices, though. Dandridge's smile was thin as parchment. That he does. Just remember, Mr. Carter. Choices have consequences, and in Dust Rock, those consequences tend to echo with that cryptic warning. The sheriff touched his hat to Evelyn and left. The saloon seemed to exhale collectively once the door stopped swinging. Dandridge is in thick with the mining consortium, Tom said quietly. They tried to buy the Garrison mine before it got shut down. Some say they're the reason it got shut down, after they couldn't get their hands on it legal-like. Tom, Evelyn warned again. What? Man ought to know what he's walking into. Tom turned to Caleb. You seem like decent folk, mister. Take some advice from someone who's lived in this dust bowl for 20 years. Ride on out, tonight. Whatever you're running from can't be worse than what's waiting in that mine. But Caleb wasn't running from anything. He was running towards something, though he couldn't have said what. It had been 3 years since the fire at the Comstock Lode took his wife and daughter. 3 years of drifting like smoke on the wind, seeking, what? Redemption? Death? Sometimes he couldn't tell the difference. Where would I find young Garrison? He asked. Evelyn studied him for a long moment. Something flickering in those green eyes. Recognition, perhaps, of one damaged soul seeing another. He's staying at the hotel, room 4, but sunset's coming. Mr. Carter. Might be better to wait for morning light. Darkness has a way of making fools of careful men. I've been a fool in daylight often enough. Doubt the darkness will make much difference. He finished his whiskey and stood, noting how the late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting the saloon in shades of amber and blood. The 3 men watched him with expressions caught between pity and relief. Pity for his presumed fate. Relief that it wasn't them walking toward it. Mr. Carter, Evelyn called as he reached the door. If you're truly set on this course, come back before you go to the mine. I might have something that could help. He touched his hat in acknowledgement and stepped out into the dying light. The wind had picked up, sending dust devils spinning down the empty street like diminutive tornadoes. Belle nickered softly as he untied her, sensing perhaps the change that was coming. The Dust Rock Hotel squatted at the end of Main Street, 2 stories of pretension in a town that could barely support one. The clerk, a nervous man with thinning hair and thick spectacles, directed him to room 4 with obvious reluctance, as if merely speaking of young Garrison might invoke some calamity. Caleb found Marcus Garrison, Jr., sprawled on his bed, staring at the ceiling with the hollow eyes of a man who'd inherited more than property from his father's death. Empty bottles littered the floor, and the room stank of whiskey and despair. You're the fool asking about the mine, Garrison said without looking at him. It wasn't a question. So they tell me. Good, I've been waiting for a fool. Only a fool would buy what I'm selling. Garrison finally turned his head, revealing a face that might have been handsome before grief and liquor took their toll. You know why my father held on to that mine? Pride. Pure, stupid pride. It killed my grandfather. Killed my uncle. Now it's killed him too. The sheriff seems to think he died natural. A harsh laugh escaped Garrison's throat. Natural, sure. Nothing more natural than a healthy man's heart stopping the night after he went back to check on his precious mine. He was obsessed with it. Said there was something down there, something that needed guarding. He sat up suddenly, swaying slightly. You want to know the truth, Carter? That mine doesn't just take lives. It takes souls, burns them up from the inside until there's nothing left but ash and regret. $10, Caleb said simply. $10. Garrison agreed, laughing again, but there were tears in it now. Hell of a price for damnation. They completed the transaction there in that whiskey-soaked room. Garrison's shaking hands, signing over the deed with evident relief. As Caleb tucked the paper into his vest, Garrison grabbed his wrist. Listen to me, he said urgently, his grip surprisingly strong. Whatever you think you're going to find down there, you're wrong. My family spent 40 years trying to understand what's in that mine. All we learned was that some doors, once opened, can never be closed. What did your father find? I don't know. He wouldn't say, just kept muttering about the burning and those who wait below. The night he died, I heard him talking to someone in his study, but when I went in, he was alone. Stone cold alone, talking to shadows about forgiveness and flames. Caleb gently disengaged his wrist. I'm sorry for your loss. Save your sorrow for yourself. Mr. Carter, you're going to need it. Outside, full darkness had claimed Dust Rock. The stars emerged one by one, cold and distant as forgotten prayers. Caleb stood in the street, deed in his pocket, feeling the weight of his decision settling over him like a shroud. The Lucky Strike was busier now, yellow light spilling from its windows along with the sounds of rough laughter and clinking glasses. But as he pushed through the doors, conversation died like a candle in the wind. Every eye turned to him, and he read his fate in their faces. He was no longer a stranger, but a dead man walking. Evelyn appeared from the back room, carrying something wrapped in oilcloth. Without a word, she led him through a door marked private into what appeared to be her living quarters, a surprisingly refined space with books lining one wall and a painting of mountains that might have been anywhere but here. Sit, she commanded, and he found himself obeying. She unwrapped the oilcloth to reveal a leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. This belonged to William Morrison, my husband. He was the one who ordered the mine closed, but before that, he spent months investigating the accidents. What he found, she trailed off, then seemed to gather herself. The Garrison mine was never about silver. Mr. Carter, at least, not entirely. What then? Evidence, cover-ups, men who died not from cave-ins or gas, but because they saw something they shouldn't have. William was building a case against some very powerful people when he... Her jaw tightened. When his horse spooked on a clear trail and threw him into a ravine, broke his neck. The horse was found shot 2 days later. She pushed the journal across to him. Take it. Maybe you'll finish what he started. Or maybe you'll join him. Either way, someone should know the truth. As Caleb reached for the journal, she caught his hand. Her touch was warm, alive in a way he'd almost forgotten existed. Why? She asked softly. What drives a man to buy death for $10? He thought of flames reaching toward a smoke-filled sky, of small hands he'd never hold again. Maybe because I've already paid a higher price for life. Understanding dawned in her eyes, the recognition of shared loss that needed no words. She released his hand slowly, reluctantly. Then go tomorrow. Rest tonight. The dead will wait. They always do. But Caleb knew he wouldn't rest. Not tonight. Not with the deed burning in his pocket and the journal's secrets calling to him. He stood, tucking the journal inside his coat. Thank you, Mrs. Morrison. Evelyn, she corrected. And don't thank me yet. I may have just handed you a death warrant. We're all dying, Evelyn. Some of us just need a better reason. He left her there in the lamplight. This woman who guarded her own ghosts as carefully as he carried his. Outside, the wind had stilled, leaving Dust Rock wrapped in an expectant silence. Somewhere in the darkness, coyotes howled, their voices carrying across the desert like lost souls seeking home. Caleb Carter, drifter, fool, and now mine owner, walked toward the edge of town where Garrison Hill rose against the stars. Tomorrow he would descend into whatever hell waited below. Tonight, he would read a dead man's journal and prepare to join him. Behind him, in the Lucky Strike Saloon, Evelyn Morrison stood at her window watching his figure disappear into the darkness. She'd seen that look before, in William's eyes. The look of a man who'd found a cause worth dying for. She only prayed this one might find something worth living for instead. Dawn came to Garrison Hill like a reluctant witness, painting the abandoned mine workings in shades of rust and shadow. Caleb had spent the night in the old foreman's shack, reading William Morrison's journal by candlelight until his eyes burned and the words swam before him like accusatory ghosts. What he'd learned turned his stomach and steeled his resolve in equal measure. The mine entrance yawned before him now, a mouth of timber and stone breathing out air that tasted of copper and something else, something that made the horses nervous and sent the desert rats scurrying to safer ground. Belle stood tied a good distance away, her ears flat against her head, watching him with reproachful eyes. He'd brought supplies from Garrett's store at first light: rope, 3 lanterns, matches sealed in wax, a pickaxe, and provisions for 2 days underground. The storekeeper had served him with the reluctance of a man handling funeral arrangements, muttering prayers under his breath with each item tallied. "Lord watches over fools and children," Garrett had said. "Making change. Ain't sure which category you fall into. Mr. Carter." "Neither," Caleb had replied. "Just a man with business below." Now, standing at the threshold between daylight and darkness, he understood why the locals spoke of the mine in whispers. The support beams groaned despite the still air, and somewhere in the depths came a sound like breathing, though he knew it was only the mountain settling. The way all mines shifted and sighed. He'd spent enough years underground to know the difference between natural sounds and other things. The main shaft descended at a steep angle, following the ore vein into the mountain's heart. Someone had chalked warnings on the timber supports. "Go back. God help us." And most disturbing, "They're still down here." The chalk was fresh, no more than a few months old, after the mine was supposedly sealed. Caleb lit his first lantern and started down. The descent took him through layers of geological time, each stratum telling its own story of ancient seas and volcanic fury. But it was the human story that interested him, the recent scratches on the walls, the abandoned tools that looked dropped in haste rather than left by design, the dark stains on the timber that might have been water damage or might have been something else entirely. At the first level, about 60 feet down, he found the remains of the mining operation frozen in time. Ore carts sat on their rails like a derailed train of thought. Papers scattered across a desk in the shift supervisor's alcove fluttered in the draft from his lantern. He examined them carefully. Work orders, assay reports, and then different handwriting. Hurried, desperate. "Thompson heard it again last night. Says it's calling his name. I told him it's just the wind, but we both know better. Whatever Garrison found in Shaft 3, it's got no business seeing daylight. Some things are buried for a reason." The date was 2 days before the mine's closure. Caleb pocketed the note and continued deeper. The second level showed signs of hasty abandonment: half-filled ore buckets, a lunch pail with moldered food, a jacket hanging on a peg as if its owner had just stepped away. But it was the scratches on the wall that made him pause. Not tool marks, fingernail gouges, as if someone had clawed at the stone in desperation. He was examining these when he heard it. A voice, distant and distorted by echo, calling from somewhere below. Not words exactly, but a sound that wanted to be words, that pressed against the boundary between human utterance and something older, more primal. His hand found the revolver at his hip, though what good bullets would do against sounds in the dark, he couldn't say. The lantern flame flickered. casting dancing shadows that seemed to move independently of the light source. "Hello?" His voice came out steadier than he felt. "Anyone down there?" The sound stopped as if cut with a knife. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Expectant, watchful, waiting. He pressed on. Shaft 3 branched off from the main tunnel at the 3rd level, marked by newer timber and a sign that read, "Danger, unstable ground." The journal had mentioned this shaft specifically. According to Morrison's investigation, it was here that miners had broken through into something that wasn't on any geological survey, a natural cavern system that predated the mine by centuries, possibly millennia. The entrance to Shaft 3 had been boarded over, but the boards lay scattered now like broken teeth. Someone had torn through from the inside out, leaving splinters and nail heads pointing outward. Recent work. From the look of it, within the last week. Caleb raised his lantern, peering into the darkness beyond. The shaft angled down sharply, and about 20 feet in, he could see where the careful mine construction gave way to natural stone. The walls there were smooth, almost glass-like, and they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He was about to enter when he heard footsteps behind him. "I figured you for a fool. Carter, but not a deaf one." He turned to find Tom from the saloon, accompanied by 2 younger men who bore enough resemblance to be his sons. All 3 carried lanterns and wore the hard expressions of men about to do something they'd rather not. "Tom," Caleb acknowledged. "Come to see the show? Come to stop you making the same mistake as the others?" Tom's weathered face was grim. "That journal Evie gave you, it tell you what happened to the men who went past this point? It mentioned disappearances." "Disappearances?" Tom spat. "That's one word for it. My nephew James went down there 3 months ago, after we thought the mine was sealed. Found him 2 days later in his own bed, 20 miles away. No memory of how he got there, and his hair gone white as snow. Boy was 19 years old. Came out looking like his own grandfather." One of the younger men, Tom's sons, surely shifted nervously. "Tell him about the burns." "Pa." Tom's jaw tightened. "Burns on his hands and feet, like he'd walked through fire, but no fire damage on his clothes, no smoke in his lungs, just burns that wouldn't heal right, that still pain him when the weather turns." "I appreciate the warning," Caleb said, "but I've got my reasons for going down there." "Reasons?" Tom studied him with eyes that had seen too much. "Let me guess. Loss, guilt, some fool notion that facing death will balance some cosmic ledger. I've seen that look before. Carter, seen it on every man who went down into the dark and came back less than whole. Maybe that's what I'm counting on." Before Tom could respond, a new voice echoed from the tunnel, not the inhuman sound from before, but clearly a woman's voice, urgent and afraid. "Help me, please, someone help me." Tom's sons started forward, but their father caught them with an iron grip. "No, you hear that? That's Martha Jennings's voice. Martha who died in the cave-in 5 years back. It's one of their tricks." "Their tricks?" Caleb asked. "Whatever's down there. It learns, remembers, uses what it learns to draw more folks down." Tom's face had gone pale. "First time I heard it, it sounded like my brother. Been dead 10 years, but I'd have sworn on a Bible it was him calling my name." The voice came again, closer now, more desperate. "Please, I can see your light. Don't leave me." Despite himself, Caleb felt the pull of it, the human instinct to help overriding logical thought. The thing that disturbed him most was how perfect it was, not just the voice, but the emotion behind it, the catch of tears, the precise tone of someone clinging to hope. "That's why we're here." Tom continued. "Evie sent us, said if we couldn't talk sense into you, least we could do was make sure you knew what you were walking into. That journal tell you about the fire?" Caleb nodded slowly. "Bodies burned from the inside out, no sign of external flame. My brother was one of them. Samuel Cray, the one young Pete mentioned yesterday. When we found him..." Tom's voice broke slightly. "Weren't nothing left but charred bones and his mining helmet, sitting perfect-like on top of the remains. But his clothes, the wooden beams around him, even the oil in his lantern, all untouched." "What did the mine owners say?" One of Tom's sons laughed bitterly. Spontaneous combustion, natural gases, anything but the truth, that they dug too deep and found something that should have stayed buried. And yet the mine stayed open. Caleb observed. Money, Tom said simply. The consortium wanted what was down there, especially after the strange death started. Morrison tried to stop them legal-like, but a new sound cut him off. Not a voice this time, but a rhythmic pounding like a heartbeat made of stone. Coming from deep within Shaft 3, the walls seemed to pulse with it, dust sifting from the ceiling with each beat. It's starting, Tom whispered. The calling happens same time every day, sunrise and sunset, like something down there keeps a schedule. Or like something's waking up, one of his sons added. Caleb felt it then, not just heard it, but felt it in his bones. A vibration that seemed to sync with his own heartbeat, pulling him toward the darkness of Shaft 3. For a moment, just a moment, the darkness didn't seem threatening but inviting, promising answers to questions he hadn't known he was asking. He shook his head to clear it and found Tom watching him knowingly. Feel that pull? That's how it gets you. Makes you want to go down there. Makes you think it's your own idea. Tom stepped closer. Whatever you think you need to find down there. Carter, it ain't worth your soul. Maybe not. Caleb agreed. But some things are worth the risk. He turned toward Shaft 3, but Tom's hand on his shoulder stopped him. If you're hell-bent on this, at least take some advice. Don't trust nothing you see or hear down there. Don't follow no lights but your own. And whatever you do, don't touch the burned walls. That's how it marks you, how it follows you back up. Anything else? Tom released him reluctantly. Yeah, if you make it back, when you make it back, you come find us. Evie's got a group, folks who've lost people to the mine. We compare notes, try to make sense of it all. Maybe together we can figure out how to stop it. Stop what, exactly? Whatever's been sleeping down there that Garrison had the poor judgment to wake up. With that, Tom and his sons retreated, their footsteps echoing in the tunnel until Caleb stood alone again at the threshold of Shaft 3. The pounding had stopped, replaced by that expectant silence that seemed to press against his eardrums. He secured a rope to a timber support, tested its strength, then clipped the other end to his belt. 3 lanterns hung from various points on his person, and he'd stuffed his pockets with the matches. If something down there fed on darkness, he'd give it all the light he could muster. The first step into Shaft 3 felt like crossing a boundary more significant than the simple transition from mine shaft to natural cave. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in as many feet, and his breath came out in visible puffs. The smooth walls Tom had warned about began here, black stone polished to an impossible sheen, reflecting his lantern light in ways that hurt to look at directly. 20 feet in, the shaft opened into a natural chamber that defied the lantern's ability to fully illuminate. Stalactites hung like ancient teeth, and the floor sloped away into darkness. But it was the walls that drew his attention. Not smooth here, but covered in markings. Not carved, but burned into the stone as if by tremendous heat. Symbols that looked almost familiar, like letters from a language he'd never learned but somehow recognized. And among them, scratched with more recent tools, names and dates. James Garrison, 1876. William Cork, 1879. Martha Jennings, 1880. Dozens of names, maybe hundreds, dating back far longer than the mine's official history. Caleb was copying some of the symbols into his notebook when he noticed the silence had changed quality. Not empty now, but full of presence, of watching, of waiting. He turned slowly, raising his lantern. A figure stood at the edge of the light, just far enough away that details were impossible to make out. It might have been a man, but something about the proportions was wrong. Too tall, too thin. Joints that bent at angles that suggested damage rather than design. "Who's there?" Caleb called, his hand finding his revolver again. The figure didn't answer, but it moved. Not walking exactly, but flowing from one position to another like smoke given form. Closer now. Close enough that he could see it wore the remains of mining clothes. though they hung on it like rags on a scarecrow. Samuel Cray. At the name, the figure stopped. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through the stone itself. He burned still. We all burn still, down in the deep where the fire never dies. What fire? What happened here? Garrison found the door. Garrison opened the door. Now the door won't close, and we feed the flame with our forever. The figure raised what might have been a hand, and Caleb saw the bones beneath transparent flesh, saw them glowing with an inner heat that had nothing to do with any earthly fire. Come, it said. Come and burn with us. Your guilt calls to the flame like blood to sharks. She waits for you, the one you couldn't save. She burns too, burns and calls your name in the language of loss. Rage flared in Caleb's chest. How dare this thing speak of his daughter, use his grief as bait? He raised his revolver, knowing it was useless but needing to act. The shot echoed through the chamber like thunder, the bullet passing through the figure without effect. It laughed, or made a sound that might have been laughter if laughter could be made of breaking glass and screaming wind. Iron and lead, earth and anger. You bring such small weapons to face the eternal. Come, she waits below, where all the lost things gather. Despite every instinct screaming warning, Caleb found himself stepping forward. The figure retreated, maintaining the same distance, leading him deeper into the chamber. Other shapes moved at the edges of his vision, more burning souls, more victims of whatever lay beneath Garrison Hill. The chamber narrowed into a passage that descended at an impossible angle. The burned symbols covered every surface now, pulsing with their own faint light. The air grew thick, hard to breathe, tasting of copper and ashes. And then, abruptly, the passage opened into a vast space that his lanterns couldn't begin to illuminate. But there was light here, a pillar of cold fire rising from a chasm in the floor, casting everything in shades of blue and white. Around it, arranged in perfect circles, were the sources of the burned bones Tom had described. Dozens of human figures, standing motionless, burning without being consumed. But it was what lay beyond the fire that stopped Caleb's heart. A door, not of wood or stone, but of something that hurt to perceive directly. It stood open just a crack, and through that crack came light that was the opposite of light, dark that was more than darkness. And from beyond it, calling in a voice he'd have known anywhere, came the sound of his daughter singing the lullaby he'd sung to her every night of her too short life. The figure that had led him gestured toward the door. She's there, just beyond. The fire took her, but the door can give her back. All you have to do is feed it, one soul for another. The eternal economy of loss and redemption. Sssss, Caleb's legs moved without his permission, carrying him toward that awful door and the sweet, impossible sound of his daughter's voice. The burned figures parted before him like an honor guard of the damned. The fire reached out tendrils of cold flame, caressing his face with promises of reunion. He was 3 steps from the door when Evelyn's journal fell from his pocket, landing open on a page he hadn't yet read. His daughter's voice grew more insistent, but something made him glance down at William Morrison's careful script. The entity beyond the door feeds on grief and guilt. It takes the form of our losses, speaks in the voices of our dead. But it is not them. It is older than memory, hungry beyond measure. It offers reunion but delivers only enslavement. The burned ones are not dead. They are fuel, keeping the door from opening fully, if it ever opens completely. The sentence was unfinished, but Caleb understood. He forced himself to stop, though every fiber of his being screamed to continue. The singing grew louder, more desperate. "Papa, please, I'm so cold. The fire is so cold." "You're not her," he said through gritted teeth. "My Sarah is dead. This is just an echo, a lie wearing her voice." The singing stopped. The silence that followed was terrible, full of rage and thwarted hunger. The burned figures turned toward him as one, their faces showing the first expression he'd seen, disappointment. "Then burn anyway," they said in unison. "Burn for nothing. Burn because you deserve to burn. Burn because the living have no place here, and the door must be fed." They surged toward him, hands outstretched, flesh trailing fire. Caleb ran, abandoning dignity for survival, crashing through the passages as the burned ones pursued. Behind him, that terrible door groaned wider, and something vast and patient began to push through. He burst from shaft 3 like a drowning man breaking the surface, gasping for air that didn't taste of ashes and despair. Behind him came the sound of pursuit, growing closer. Without thinking, he grabbed one of the wooden supports and pulled. Years of neglect had weakened it, and with a groan of protesting timber, the entrance to shaft 3 collapsed, sealing whatever was behind him in darkness. But not silence. Through tons of rock and wood, he could still hear them calling, still hear that door groaning wider. He ran then, up through the levels of the mine, lanterns swinging wildly, their light painting mad shadows on the walls. Only when he burst into daylight did he stop, falling to his knees in the dust, gulping the clean desert air. The sun was directly overhead. He'd been underground for hours, though it had felt like minutes. His hands were shaking, and when he looked at them, he saw the beginning of burns on his palms, perfect circles where he'd touched the rope while fleeing, as if the rope itself had been infected by the cold fire below. Belle nickered nervously as he approached, shying away from him. Animals always knew, but eventually, she let him mount, and together they descended Garrison Hill. At the bottom, he found Evelyn waiting with Tom and a handful of others. She took one look at his face and the burns on his hands and nodded grimly. "You saw it then, the door. I saw it, and I heard things that can't be true. The truth," Evelyn said softly, "is whatever that thing beyond the door wants it to be. Come, let me tend those burns. And then we need to talk about what William discovered, about why the door was opened, and about who's been making sure it stays that way." As she led him back toward town, Caleb glanced back at Garrison Hill. Smoke was rising from the mine entrance. Not much, just wisps, as if something far below had found a new crack to breathe through. The drifter had bought the abandoned mine for $10. What he'd found beneath had begun to burn its way into him. Whether that fire would consume him or forge him into something stronger remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. The door was still opening, and someone in Dust Rock wanted it that way. The sandstorm hit Dust Rock like the fist of an angry god. Caleb had seen it building on the horizon all afternoon, a wall of red-brown fury that swallowed the desert mile by mile. The old-timers in town had started boarding up windows and bringing livestock to shelter, their movements quick and practiced. These storms could last hours or days. They warned, turning the air to grinding powder that found its way into everything. He'd been helping Evelyn secure the saloon's shutters when the first winds arrived, carrying the earthy scent of disrupted desert and the promise of worse to come. Her hands worked with efficient grace, but he noticed how they trembled slightly when thunder rumbled across the darkening sky. "We need to get to shelter," she said, raising her voice above the rising wind. "This one's going to be bad." But shelter was exactly what they didn't reach in time. The storm struck with full force while they were still in the street, turning day to night in seconds. Sand and debris filled the air, making breathing difficult and visibility impossible. Caleb grabbed Evelyn's hand, that warm, living anchor in the chaos, and pulled her toward the nearest structure, which happened to be the entrance to an old mine shaft on the town's edge. Not the Garrison mine, but one of the earlier attempts that honeycombed the hills around Dust Rock, abandoned for decades. But it would have to do. They stumbled inside just as the storm reached its full fury. The sudden cessation of wind was almost shocking, though they could hear it howling just beyond the entrance like a living thing denied its prey. "Well," Evelyn said, brushing sand from her hair with shaking fingers, "this wasn't how I planned to spend my afternoon." Caleb lit one of the lanterns he'd taken to carrying everywhere since his experience in the Garrison mine. The yellow light revealed a tunnel stretching back into darkness, support beams still mostly intact despite their age. Unlike the Garrison mine, this one felt merely empty rather than occupied. "Could be worse," he said. "Could be the other mine." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "True enough. though being trapped underground with you might scandalize what's left of my reputation. I think your reputation can weather it. You're the one who serves whiskey to drifters and keeps dead men's journals. Among other sins—" The lightness left her voice. "How are your hands?" He held them up to the light. The burns had formed a pattern now, circles within circles, like a child's drawing of flowers. If flowers could be made of scar tissue and constant, low-level pain. Evelyn's treatment had helped, but some wounds went deeper than salve could reach. "They'll do," he said. She moved closer, taking his hands in hers with the professional detachment of someone who'd tended many injuries. But there was something else in her touch, too, a gentleness that had nothing to do with medical care. "The pattern is spreading," she observed. "William wrote about this. The mark of the door. He called it, said it would either fade with time or consume the bearer entirely." Caleb had read that passage too. "I'm hoping for the former." "Hope." She released his hands slowly. "That's what killed William. You know, hope that he could find a legal solution. Hope that justice still meant something in a town built on greed and graves." Thunder crashed overhead, so loud it seemed to shake the mountain itself. Dust sifted from the ceiling, and somewhere deeper in the mine, something shifted with a sound like settling bones. "We should probably move away from the entrance," Caleb suggested. "These old shafts weren't built to last." They ventured deeper, finding a side chamber about 50 feet in where the ceiling looked more stable. Mining equipment lay scattered about, pickaxes rusted to shadows of their former selves. Buckets that had held their last load of ore for longer than Dust Rock had been a town. Evelyn spread her shawl on the ground, creating a small island of civilization in the darkness. They sat close together, the lantern between them, while outside the storm raged on. "Tell me about William," Caleb said after a while, "if you don't mind." She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she did speak, her voice carried the careful tone of someone handling fragile memories. "He was a good man, stubborn as a mule and twice as righteous, but good. Came to Dust Rock as a circuit judge, full of ideas about bringing law to the lawless." A bitter laugh escaped her. The town taught him different quick enough. But he stayed. He stayed, said someone had to bear witness, even if they couldn't bring justice. Started documenting everything, every suspicious death, every claim jumped, every miner who went missing. She pulled her knees to her chest, making herself smaller in the circle of light. "I begged him to stop, told him the consortium had killed men for less, but he said truth mattered, even if no one was listening." "Someone's listening now," Caleb said quietly. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw past the armor of competence to the grief beneath. "Are you? Or are you just another man looking for a good death?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Caleb considered his answer carefully, knowing she deserved honesty. 3 years ago, I would have said yes. When I lost Mary and Sarah in the fire, I wanted nothing more than to follow them. Took every dangerous job, picked every fight, waited for the bullet or the cave-in that would end it. He stared at the burns on his hands. But dying is easy. It's the living that takes courage. And now I'm starting to think maybe William was right. Maybe truth does matter, even in a place like Dust Rock. Maybe especially in a place like Dust Rock. She shifted closer. Whether for warmth or comfort, he couldn't say. "The fire that took your family, was it an accident?" That's what they said. Faulty equipment in the Comstock mine. But Mary had been asking questions about safety violations, organizing the other miners' wives. His jaw tightened. "The fire started in our cabin while I was on shift. Spread too fast for anyone to escape. They said it was a knocked-over lantern, but Mary was always careful with fire. Always." "I'm sorry," Evelyn whispered. "I'm so very sorry." They sat in companionable silence, listening to the storm's fury. The lantern flame flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls that almost looked like figures if you didn't look too close. Caleb found himself oddly content. Despite everything, There was something healing about sharing grief with someone who understood its weight. "I was pregnant when William died," Evelyn said suddenly. 3 months along. Lost the baby a week after the funeral. The doctor said it was the shock, but I think some part of me couldn't bear to bring a child into a world that could be so cruel." Caleb didn't offer empty platitudes, knowing they would ring hollow. Instead, he took her hand, offering the simple comfort of human connection. Her fingers intertwined with his, careful of the burns. "What did William discover?" he asked eventually. "In specific terms, what was worth killing him for?" The consortium, Henderson, Marsh, and Dandridge, though he wasn't sheriff then, had been using the mines for more than silver extraction. They'd found something down there, years before Garrison opened that door, something that changed them, made them different. Different how? They stopped aging normally. Henderson should be 70 if he's a day, but he looks 50. They made fortunes on investments that should have failed, as if they knew things before they happened. And people who opposed them had accidents, or disappeared, or... She shuddered. Or went mad, claiming they saw burned figures in their dreams, heard voices calling them underground. Like what's happening now? No, what's happening now is worse. Before, they controlled it, used it sparingly. But when Garrison wouldn't sell, they got desperate. Pushed too hard, and Garrison, stubborn fool that he was, decided if they wanted what was under his land so badly, he'd find it first. And opened the door. And opened the door, she confirmed. Now it can't be controlled, can't be contained. William thought they were trying to find a way to close it again, but I think some of them don't want it closed. I think they're feeding it. The storm's intensity increased, if such a thing was possible. The mountain groaned around them, and Caleb thought he heard, beneath the wind's howl, something else, a rhythmic pounding like he'd heard in the Garrison mine. "Do you hear that?" he asked. Evelyn nodded, her face pale in the lantern light. "It's been getting stronger. Every storm, every time the barrier between things grows thin." William believed the storms were connected to the door somehow, that they came more frequently after it was disturbed, as if in response to her words. The pounding grew louder, not from outside now, but from deeper in the mine, from the darkness beyond their small circle of light. "We should," Caleb began, but stopped as a new sound reached them. Footsteps, measured, deliberate, coming closer. He drew his revolver, pushing Evelyn behind him. "Who's there?" The footsteps stopped just beyond the lantern's reach. Then, stepping into the light like an actor onto a stage, came Sheriff Dandridge, but not as Caleb had seen him before. The man's clothes were torn, his badge tarnished, and his eyes reflected the lantern flame in ways human eyes shouldn't. Well, Dandridge said, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to come from the stone itself. The new mine owner and the widow. How cozy. "Sheriff." Caleb kept his gun steady. "Fancy meeting you here." "Oh, I'm not here. Mr. Carter, not really. This is just a projection, you might say. A little trick we learned from our friends below." Dandridge's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "The storm provides such wonderful opportunities for conversation. What do you want?" "What we've always wanted. Order, control. The mine produces so much more than silver. You see, knowledge, power, the ability to shape reality itself, if one knows how to ask nicely." He turned that terrible gaze on Evelyn. "Your husband never understood that. Always so concerned with petty morality. Unable to see the bigger picture." "The bigger picture being what?" Evelyn's voice was steady despite her fear. "Feeding innocent people to that thing beyond the door." "Sacrifice," Dandridge corrected. "Every age demands its sacrifices. The ancient peoples who first found the door understood that. Blood for bounty, souls for secrets. A perfectly reasonable exchange." "Except now your door won't close," Caleb pointed out. "Your control is slipping." For the first time, something like worry flickered across Dandridge's inhuman features. A temporary setback. Once we reclaim the garrison mine, we'll restore the proper order. Which brings me to why I'm here." He pulled out a paper from his coat, somehow pristine despite his disheveled appearance. "A new deed. Sign it over to the consortium. Mr. Carter, walk away. Live whatever life you can with those pretty burns on your hands. This is your only warning. And if I refuse, then you'll discover what happened to the last 15 men who thought they could stand against us. Some of them are still screaming, down in the deep places where even the burned ones fear to go." Caleb thumbed back the hammer on his revolver. "Get out." Dandridge laughed. A sound like breaking bells. "You can't shoot a projection, fool. But by all means, waste your bullets. You'll need them soon enough." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Mrs. Morrison? We know about your little group. Your gathering of the grieving. It would be such a shame if something happened to them. Tom Brennan has such lovely sons. Be terrible if they had an accident in the mines they work." "You bastard!" Evelyn snarled, starting forward, but Caleb caught her arm. Temper. Dandridge chided. "Remember, all we want is order, cooperation, the same thing we wanted from your husband. I do hope you prove more flexible than he was." With that, he walked backward into the darkness, not turning away, just retreating step by step until the shadows swallowed him. The footsteps continued for a moment more, then stopped with unnatural abruptness. They waited, tense and alert, but no further sounds came except the storm's continued rage. Finally, Caleb lowered his gun, though he didn't holster it. "Projection," he muttered. "What in hell does that mean?" "I don't know," Evelyn admitted. "But if they can do that, if they can be in multiple places, speak through storm and stone—" She trailed off, the implications too disturbing to voice. They huddled closer, the lantern their only defense against the pressing dark. Neither spoke of the threat against Tom's sons, but it hung between them like a sword. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating. "I won't sign," Caleb said firmly. "Whatever they want with that mine, it can't be allowed. They'll kill you. Maybe. But I've been living on borrowed time since the Comstock fire. At least this death would mean something." She turned to face him fully, and he saw tears tracking down her cheeks. "I'm tired of meaningful deaths. Caleb, I've had my fill of martyrs and heroes. Just once, I'd like to see someone survive their principles." He reached up to wipe away her tears, his burned hand gentle against her skin. "Then help me, you and Tom and the others, not to die meaningfully, but to live, to fight, to close that damn door before it swallows the whole desert. You don't know what you're asking. The consortium owns half the territory. They have judges, lawmen, even a few federal marshals in their pocket. And now, with these new abilities, then we'll have to be smarter. William gathered evidence. We'll gather more, find others who've been wronged, build something they can't simply murder away." She laughed, but it had hope in it. "You're as stubborn as he was." "I'll take that as a compliment." The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass, then, moved by impulse or desperation or something deeper, they came together in a kiss that tasted of tears and determination and defiance of the dark. When they parted, Evelyn's eyes held new resolve. "All right, Caleb Carter, we'll try it your way, but if you get yourself killed, I'll never forgive you." "Deal," he said, and kissed her again as the storm raged on. They talked through the night, making plans and sharing stories. She told him about the town before the consortium's rise, when it had been rough but honest. He told her about his daughter's laugh, how it could light up a room better than any lantern, and when exhaustion finally claimed them, they slept sitting up, leaning against each other while the lantern burned low. The storm continued its assault on the world above, but in their small circle of light, they'd found something worth defending. Dawn came like a reluctant blessing. The storm's fury spent at last. They emerged from the mine to find dust rock transformed, buildings half buried in sand. the landscape rearranged by wind and fury, but the sun broke through the remaining clouds, painting the desert in shades of gold and scarlet. They stood at the mine entrance, hands linked, watching the light reclaim the world. Behind them lay darkness and old bones. Ahead waited the consortium's wrath, the mystery of the door, and slim hope of justice. But for now, in this moment, they had each other and the promise of a new day. And sometimes, Caleb thought, that was enough to begin with. "Come on," Evelyn said, squeezing his hand. "Let's go face whatever comes next." Together, they walked back toward Dust Rock, leaving footprints in the fresh sand that the next storm would surely erase. But they walked nonetheless, because that's what the living did. They moved forward, one step at a time, carrying their dead with them, but not letting the weight drag them down. The burned marks on Caleb's hands throbbed with each heartbeat, reminding him of the price of knowledge. But Evelyn's hand in his reminded him of the reason to keep paying it. Somewhere beneath Garrison Hill, the door groaned wider, but above ground, in the harsh light of a desert morning, hope stirred like a seed in barren soil, waiting for the right moment to bloom. The news spread through Dust Rock like wildfire in dry brush. Caleb Carter had found something in the Garrison mine. By noon, the town buzzed with speculation. Some said he'd discovered a new vein of silver. Others whispered about bodies, evidence of old crimes. The truth, as Caleb was learning, had a way of twisting in the desert heat. He sat in Evelyn's private room behind the saloon, studying the items he'd managed to retrieve before sealing Shaft 3. The burned journal pages were barely legible, but what he could read made his stomach turn. Names, dates, and detailed accounts of men fed to whatever lay beyond the door. Not random accidents or unfortunate casualties, deliberate sacrifices, scheduled and recorded like business transactions. "Look at this," he said, showing Evelyn a partially burned ledger. February 1880. Thompson delivered as agreed. Payment received in full. March 1880. The Martinez brothers, as per arrangement. It goes on for pages. Evelyn's face had gone pale. Those were all men who opposed the consortium. Union organizers, claim holders who wouldn't sell, anyone who asked too many questions. And someone was paying for their removal. These initials here, H, M, D, Henderson, Marsh, and Dandridge. Has to be, but this alone isn't enough. Any lawyer worth his salt would claim these are forgeries, or that the entries mean something else entirely. A knock at the door interrupted them. Tom Brennan entered, his weathered face grim. "We got trouble. Dandridge has deputized a dozen men, roughest bunch you ever saw. Word is they're coming for you. Carter, legal-like, with a warrant." "A warrant for what?" "Destruction of property, reckless endangerment, and," Tom's mouth twisted, "attempted murder of the sheriff." "That's ridiculous," Evelyn protested. "Caleb hasn't even seen Dandridge since the storm." "Don't matter. Judge Cornelius signed it this morning. They mean to take you in, one way or another." Caleb stood, checking his revolver. "How long do we have?" 20 minutes, maybe less. They're gathering at the sheriff's office now. Then we need to move." Evelyn was already gathering the evidence, wrapping it in oilcloth. "Tom, can you get word to the others? Tell them to meet at the old Hutchinson place tonight." "Already done. But Evie, they got my boys watched. Dandridge made it clear. Any more trouble from our group, and James and Pete have accidents." The weight of responsibility settled on Caleb's shoulders like a lead blanket. It was one thing to risk his own life, another entirely to endanger others. But backing down now would mean abandoning everything to the consortium's control. "Tell your boys to stay visible," he said. "Work their shifts. Go to the saloon after. Make sure plenty of people see them. We'll handle this another way." Tom nodded reluctantly and left. Evelyn turned to Caleb, worry etched in every line of her face. "You can't fight a dozen men. Don't intend to fight them. Just need to stay free long enough to get this evidence somewhere it matters." He touched her cheek gently. "There's a federal marshal in Carson City, Samuel Redmond. William mentioned him in the journal. said he was one of the few honest lawmen left. Carson City is 3 days' ride. They'll catch you before you make it out of the valley. Maybe, maybe not. He smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. I've got one advantage. I've spent 3 years running from myself. Got pretty good at it. Before she could respond, shouts erupted from the street. Through the window, they could see the deputized men spreading out, surrounding the saloon. Dandridge stood in the center, that unnatural gleam still in his eyes. "Caleb Carter," the sheriff called. "You're under arrest. Come out peaceful-like, and nobody needs to get hurt." "Back door?" Caleb asked. "Covered, most likely. But there's another way." Evelyn pulled back a rug, revealing a trap door. William had it installed. Leads to the old mine tunnels that run under Main Street. You can come up in the livery stable. "What about you?" "I'll delay them. Give you time to get Belle and ride." She pressed a leather pouch into his hands. "Money for supplies. There's a way station at Coyote Springs. The owner, Marcus Webb, rode with William during the war. He'll help you." "Evelyn, go!" She kissed him quickly, fiercely. "And come back to me." He dropped through the trap door into musty darkness. The tunnel was narrow, lined with timber that groaned under the weight of earth and buildings above. Behind him, he heard Dandridge's voice growing more insistent. Then the crash of the saloon's front door being kicked in. The tunnel branched several times, but Evelyn had given him good directions. After what felt like hours, but was probably minutes, he found the ladder leading up to the livery stable. He climbed carefully, listening for sounds above. The stable was quiet except for the normal sounds of horses. He found Belle in her stall, saddled her quickly, and led her out the back way. But as he mounted, a figure stepped from the shadows, one of Dandridge's deputies, a scarred man with dead eyes. "Going somewhere, Carter?" The man's hand went for his gun, but Caleb was already moving. Belle, sensing danger, reared and struck out with her hooves. The deputy dodged backward, his shot going wide, and Caleb spurred Belle forward, riding him down. They burst from the stable at a full gallop, scattering chickens and townspeople alike. Shouts erupted behind them, followed by gunfire. Bullets whined past like angry hornets, but Belle was desert-born and desert-trained. She stretched out her neck and ran like the wind itself. They cleared the town's edge as more riders emerged from side streets, converging on his position. Caleb bent low over Belle's neck, urging her toward the broken country beyond. The pursuit was close, too close. He could hear the thunder of hooves, the shouts of men who'd done this before. Then, from an unexpected quarter, came help. Tom Brennan's sons, James and Pete, appeared on a ridgeline with rifles. Their shots were carefully aimed, not to kill but to discourage, kicking up dust in front of the pursuers' horses. The pursuit faltered, giving Caleb precious seconds to increase his lead. He saluted the boys as he passed, hoping they wouldn't pay too dearly for their intervention. Then he was into the maze of canyons and washes that characterized the landscape beyond Dust Rock, where a man who knew the land could lose himself for days. But Caleb didn't know this land. Not well enough. He relied on instinct and Belle's sure footing, always heading generally north toward Carson City. The pursuit fell back but didn't abandon entirely. He could see dust plumes marking their position, spreading out to cut off escape routes. By late afternoon, he'd reached Coyote Springs. The way station was a modest affair. Adobe buildings clustered around a natural spring, offering water and rest to travelers crossing the desert. Marcus Webb proved to be a gruff former cavalry sergeant with eyes that missed nothing. "You'd be Carter," he said without preamble. "Evie sent word you might be coming." "How?" "Telegraph. Woman thinks of everything." Webb studied the horizon where dust clouds marked the approaching pursuit. "How many?" 8, maybe 10. Too many for a straight fight, but there's another way, if you're willing to trust me." 20 minutes later, Caleb understood the plan. Webb had hidden him and Belle in a concealed cellar beneath the stable, then met the pursuing deputies with calm hospitality. from his hiding place. Caleb could hear the conversation. Afternoon, Sheriff, hot day for a ride. Cut the pleasantries. Webb, we're looking for a fugitive. Caleb Carter. Seen him? Man came through about an hour ago. Watered his horse, bought supplies. Headed east toward the fortification range. East? Dandridge sounded suspicious. Carson City's north. Mentioned something about doubling back, losing pursuit in the canyons. You know how these desert rats think. There was a long pause. Caleb held his breath, one hand on Belle's muzzle to keep her quiet. Search the place, Dandridge ordered. Boots thundered overhead as the deputies ransacked the station. They were thorough, but not thorough enough. The cellar had been built during Apache raids, designed to be invisible even to determined searchers. Finally, grudgingly, Dandridge called off the search. If you're lying to me, Webb, I got no quarrel with the law. Sheriff, just trying to run my station in peace. The sound of horses leaving was the sweetest music Caleb had heard. He waited another hour, until full dark, before Webb let him out. They left 2 men watching the road north, Webb reported. But there's an old smuggler's trail that'll take you around. Rough going, but that mare of yours looks up to it. I owe you. You owe William Morrison. God rest him. I'm just paying forward. Webb handed him a canvas bag. Food, water, ammunition. And this, he pulled out a badge. U.S. Deputy Marshal. William sent it to me before he died. Said to give it to someone who'd use it right. Ain't official, but it might make some folks think twice. Caleb pinned the badge inside his coat. It felt heavier than its small weight warranted. The smuggler's trail proved to be generous terminology for what was essentially a goat path through the mountains. Belle picked her way carefully in the moonlight, trusting her rider as he trusted her. Behind them, Dust Rock slept under a canopy of stars. Unaware that the seeds of its transformation had been planted, they traveled through the night, resting only when Belle needed it. By dawn, they'd put significant distance between themselves and any pursuit. The landscape changed, high desert giving way to pine forests and mountain meadows. The air grew cooler, cleaner, free of the ever-present dust that characterized Dust Rock. On the second day, exhaustion forced a longer rest. Caleb found a concealed grove near a stream. Let Belle graze while he studied William's journal more carefully. The entries grew more disturbing the deeper he read. The entity beyond the door exists outside normal space and time. It feeds on human consciousness, particularly strong emotions, fear, guilt, love, hope. The burned ones aren't dead but transformed, existing simultaneously in multiple states. The consortium has learned to channel this transformation, gaining abilities that defy natural law. Another entry, dated just days before William's death. I found references to the original opening. Spanish explorers in 1542 encountered indigenous peoples who spoke of the burning door and those who walk between. The natives had sealed it with rituals and sacrifice, keeping it dormant for centuries. But greed knows no caution. The first American miners broke the seals, and the consortium has been managing the consequences ever since. Caleb looked at the burns on his hands. They'd spread again, the circular patterns now reaching his wrists. Sometimes, in the edge of his vision, he saw things that shouldn't be there, flickering flames that cast no heat, shadows that moved against the light. The door had marked him, and he wondered how long before the mark consumed him entirely. On the third morning, he created a rise and saw Carson City spread below, a proper city compared to Dust Rock, with brick buildings and paved streets, the dome of the state capitol catching the morning sun. Somewhere in those orderly streets was Samuel Redmond, perhaps the only lawman who could help. But as Caleb rode down toward the city, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Not by human eyes. He'd learned to sense those. This was different, older, like the attention of something vast and patient turning his way. The door was still opening, and those who fed it wouldn't rest until they controlled it once more, or until it consumed everything in its path. Belle whinnied nervously as they entered the city limits. Even she could feel it, the sense that they'd entered a larger game, where the stakes were more than just one town or one man's quest for justice. Caleb touched the badge hidden in his coat, thinking of Evelyn waiting in Dust Rock, of Tom's boys who'd risked everything to help him escape. He'd come seeking evidence to bring down the consortium, but what he'd found suggested a threat far greater than mere corruption. The question was, would anyone believe him? And if they did, would they act in time? The burned marks pulsed with his heartbeat as he rode toward the federal building, carrying secrets that might save Dust Rock or doom them all. Federal Marshal Samuel Redmond proved to be a man carved from the same granite as the mountains surrounding Carson City, solid, weathered, and unmovable once he'd set his position. His office occupied the top floor of the federal building, sparse but organized, with wanted posters covering one wall and a map of Nevada territory marked with colored pins on another. William Morrison was a good man, Redmond said after examining the evidence Caleb had brought. His steel-gray eyes missed nothing, particularly the spreading burn marks on Caleb's hands. Wrote me about his suspicions regarding the Dust Rock Consortium. Then his letters stopped coming. They killed him, Caleb stated flatly. Made it look like an accident. Probably. But proving it is another matter. Redmond set down the burned ledger carefully. This evidence is compelling, but it's also damaged. Any decent lawyer would tear it apart in court. We need more. Witnesses, intact documents, something irrefutable. Then come to Dust Rock. See for yourself what's happening there. Redmond leaned back in his chair, studying Caleb with the patience of a man who'd learned to read people like books. Tell me about the mine, the truth, not what you think I want to hear. So Caleb told him about the door, the burned ones, Dandridge's projection during the storm. He expected disbelief, possibly even arrest for madness. Instead, Redmond's expression grew increasingly grave. 18 years ago, the marshal said finally, I investigated a similar case in California, a gold mine where workers reported impossible things. Voices in the dark, men aging decades overnight, claims of a door to somewhere else. I wrote it off as mercury poisoning, maybe gas leaks causing hallucinations. What changed your mind? The mine owner's daughter, sweet girl, maybe 16, walked into the shaft one night. They found her 3 days later in her own bed, 70 miles away. Her hair had turned white, and she spoke in languages no one could identify. Died within a week, burned from the inside out despite no signs of external fire. Redmond stood, walking to the window that overlooked the city. I've been tracking similar incidents across the territories ever since. Always mines, always talk of doors or passages, always powerful men getting more powerful in ways that shouldn't be possible. So, you believe me? I believe William Morrison found something that got him killed. I believe the consortium in Dust Rock has crossed lines that shouldn't be crossed. And I believe you're running out of time. He gestured at Caleb's hands. Those marks are spreading faster than they should. Whatever touched you in that mine wants you back, as if in response to his words. The burns flared with sudden heat. Caleb gritted his teeth against the pain, and, for a moment, the office seemed to flicker. In that brief instant, he saw another place superimposed over the mundane reality, a vast chamber lit by cold fire, with figures standing in circles, chanting in voices that harmonized with screaming wind. Carter! Redmond's sharp voice brought him back. The marshal had his hand on Caleb's shoulder, grounding him. How often does that happen? More frequently each day. Caleb's voice came out rough. Sometimes I see things, the burned ones, the door, and lately I see Evelyn in danger. I need to get back. Not alone, you don't. Redmond moved to his desk, pulling out official papers. I'm organizing a federal investigation into the Dust Rock Mining Consortium. Telegraph the territorial governor. Get proper authorization. Should take maybe a week. We don't have a week. Every night the door opens wider. Every night more people go missing or turn up changed. Caleb stood, urgency driving him. Evelyn and the others are gathering evidence, but they're exposed. Dandridge knows about them. Redmond considered this. There might be another way, Faster, but more dangerous. I have 2 deputies I trust absolutely, Jonathan Cross and Michael Hartley. Good men. Seen their share of strange things. We could ride for Dust Rock tomorrow. Operate under federal authority to investigate interstate commerce violations. That's thin cover. It'll hold long enough to get us there legally. After that, Redmond smiled grimly. Well, we'll deal with whatever we find. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Redmond's deputies proved to be competent men who asked few questions and accepted unusual answers with professional calm. Cross was a former cavalry officer with the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen too much. Hartley had the quick movements and careful eyes of a scout. One more thing, Redmond said as they finalized plans. There's a doctor here, Elias Crenshaw. He's studied cases like yours. Might be able to slow the spread of those burns. Doctor. Crenshaw occupied a small office near the cathedral, surrounded by medical texts and specimens that would have seemed more at home in a museum. He examined Caleb's hands with professional detachment that couldn't quite hide his fascination. Extraordinary, he murmured. The pattern follows no known biological process. It's almost like something is rewriting your fundamental nature from the inside out. Can you stop it? Stop it? No, but perhaps slow it. He prepared a salve that smelled of herbs and something metallic. This won't cure you, but it might buy time. The real question is, what happens when the transformation completes? What do you mean? Crenshaw adjusted his spectacles nervously. Every case I've studied ended one of 2 ways. Either the subject resisted until their body simply gave out, or they accepted the change and became something else. Something that could walk between worlds but was no longer entirely human. And if I resist, then I suggest you resolve whatever business you have quickly. That night, Caleb dreamed of Dust Rock. But it wasn't the town he'd left. This was Dust Rock consumed. Buildings twisted into impossible angles. The sky burning with cold fire that cast no shadows. Evelyn stood in the center of Main Street, fighting off figures he recognized as townspeople transformed into burning mockeries of themselves. He woke to find his room's window frosted despite the warm night, and the burn marks had crept past his wrists. They rode out at dawn, 4 men against whatever waited in Dust Rock. The journey that had taken Caleb 3 days alone would be faster with fresh horses and Redmond's knowledge of shortcuts. But even so, every hour felt like borrowed time. On the 2nd day, they encountered refugees fleeing south, a family in a worn wagon, their faces bearing the hollow look of those who'd seen too much. "You're heading the wrong way, Marshal," the father said. "Dust Rock's gone mad. People disappearing, others walking around but wrong somehow. Sheriff's declared martial law, says there's fever in the town." "What kind of fever?" Redmond asked. "Kind that makes folks burn without fire, kind that has them speaking prophecies in tongues nobody understands." The man's wife clutched their children closer. "We got out when our neighbor, sweet old Mrs. Patterson, walked through her own walls like they weren't there. Found her in our kitchen, staring at nothing, saying the door was calling everyone home." They pressed on, urgency adding speed to their journey. The landscape grew familiar, then ominous. As they neared Dust Rock, the sky took on a peculiar quality, as if storm clouds gathered just beyond sight. Birds flew in wrong patterns, and they found dead cattle with no apparent cause of death, their eyes reflecting light that wasn't there. "Boss," Hartley said quietly, "something's following us. Has been for the last 5 miles. Caleb looked back but saw nothing except empty desert. Yet the feeling persisted, watched by eyes that existed in spaces between what was real and what was possible. They created the final rise as sunset painted the valley blood red. Dust Rock spread below them, but it was wrong. Smoke rose from several buildings, and even from this distance, they could see figures moving in ways that defied normal human motion. Too fast, too fluid, sometimes seeming to exist in multiple places at once. "Jesus Christ," Cross whispered. "What happened here?" "The door happened," Caleb said. "The consortium lost control of their pet nightmare." Redmond studied the town through field glasses. "I see barricades, Armed men at strategic points. They're not letting people leave. This isn't fever control. It's containment. There's a back way, Caleb offered. Old mine shaft that connects to tunnels under Main Street. Evelyn showed me. Then that's our route. We need to find your people, gather whoever hasn't been affected, and get out. Then we bring the full weight of federal authority down on this place. They circled wide, approaching from the east, where the old mining claims created a maze of shafts and tailings. The sun set fully as they reached the concealed entrance Caleb remembered. The darkness that fell seemed heavier than normal night, pregnant with possibility and threat. Whatever happens down there, Redmond said, checking his weapons. We stick together. No one goes off alone. No one follows voices that shouldn't be there. And if something looks wrong, it probably is. They entered the tunnel, 4 men against the dark, not knowing they were already too late. The door beneath Garrison Hill had opened wide enough for things to slip through, things that wore familiar faces but served an older, hungrier purpose. In the saloon above, Evelyn Morrison stood behind her bar, serving drinks to men who no longer needed sustenance but went through the motions anyway. Her eyes reflected lamplight in ways they never had before, and when she smiled, it was with knowledge of things mortal minds weren't meant to contain. She'd fought as long as she could, but in the end, the door's promise had been too strong. Reunion with William, freedom from grief, power over those who'd wronged her. All she'd had to do was stop resisting, let the transformation take her, become a bridge between worlds. Now she waited, patient as stone, knowing Caleb would return. The burns on his hands marked him as surely as chains. He belonged to the door now, whether he accepted it or not. And when he came, she would help him understand that burning forever wasn't torment. It was transcendence. The consortium had been wrong to try controlling it. The door didn't want servants or sacrifices. It wanted family. The sound of footsteps in the tunnel below made her smile wider. He was here, her Caleb, come back just as the door had promised. Soon he would understand. They all would. The transformation of Dust Rock was nearly complete. By dawn, either the town would be erased from maps and memory, or it would become something new, a place where the boundary between worlds grew thin, where the burned ones walked freely, where the old rules no longer applied. Evelyn began to hum, a tune that existed in no earthly songbook, preparing to welcome home the man she loved. In the tunnels below, Caleb felt his burns flare in response, and knew with cold certainty that his time for choosing had come. Resist and die human. Accept and live forever changed. The door waited, patient as eternity, for his decision. The tunnel beneath Dust Rock reeked of copper and ozone, as if lightning had struck deep underground and left its essence to fester. Caleb led the federal men through the narrow passages, his burned hands throbbing with each heartbeat, seeming to pulse in rhythm with something deeper in the earth. "Stay close," he whispered, though the warning felt inadequate against what waited above. They emerged through the hidden entrance into the saloon's cellar. The building above was silent, too silent for a place that should have held frightened people seeking shelter or answers. Caleb went first, revolver drawn, easing open the door to the main floor. The saloon was full, but wrong. Patrons sat at tables, drinks before them, engaged in pantomimes of conversation. But their movements were too synchronized, like marionettes guided by a single hand. And their eyes reflected the lamplight like pools of oil, dark and deep and utterly inhuman. Evelyn stood behind the bar, beautiful and terrible. When she saw Caleb, her smile bloomed like a poisonous flower. "Welcome home, my love," she said, and her voice carried harmonics that made the bottles behind the bar hum in sympathy. "I've been waiting for you. Evelyn." The name came out cracked. "Broken. What have you done?" "What needed doing? What you'll do too, once you stop fighting." She moved around the bar with liquid grace, and the other patrons turned their heads in perfect unison to watch. "The door showed me the truth. Caleb, all our pain, our loss, it's just resistance to what we're meant to become." Redmond stepped forward. badge held high. "By the authority of the federal government, I'm ordering everyone to stand down. This town is under martial law." Laughter rippled through the room, not from individual throats, but from the air itself, as if reality found his declaration amusing. "Your authority ends at the threshold of flesh," Evelyn said. "We've moved beyond such limitations." That's when Caleb noticed the bodies, in the corners, half hidden by shadows, were the remains of those who'd resisted. Tom Brennan sat propped against the wall, his throat open but no blood spilled, the wound cauterized by impossible heat. Others he recognized. Shopkeepers, miners, good people who'd fought to the end. "You killed them," he said, rage and grief warring in his chest. "Freed them," Evelyn corrected. "They chose cessation over transformation, a waste, but the door respects choice, as it will respect yours." One of the transformed patrons stood, Marshall Dandridge, though he wore the shape loosely now, features shifting like smoke. "Mr. Carter, how good of you to bring federal witnesses." "They'll serve wonderfully to spread the word of what's happening here." "Like hell," Cross growled, raising his rifle. "No," Caleb shouted, but too late. Cross fired, the shot deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet passed through Dandridge without effect, and the sheriff's form dispersed into shadow before reforming, now standing directly behind the deputy. "Such crude tools," Dandridge said, placing a hand on Cross's shoulder. The deputy screamed as burns spread from the point of contact, racing across his body in spiraling patterns. He aged decades in seconds, hair whitening, skin withering, before crumbling to ash that retained his shape for a moment before dispersing. "Jonathan!" Hartley moved to help, but Redmond caught his arm. "He's gone. We need to move." But movement had become impossible. The transformed patrons rose as one, surrounding them in a tightening circle. The air grew thick, oppressive, tasting of metal and burnt offerings. "Join us willingly," Evelyn said, approaching Caleb with the arms outstretched. "The door showed me William, not dead, just transformed, waiting in the spaces between. We can be together again, all of us, free from loss and pain." "That's not William," Caleb said, backing away. "It's the door wearing his face, using your grief against you." For a moment, uncertainty flickered in her inhuman eyes. Then it passed, replaced by serene certainty. "Even if that's true, does it matter? The feeling is real. The reunion is real. Reality is what we make it now." The burns on Caleb's hands flared, and suddenly he could see it all. The threads of power connecting the transformed, the thinning boundaries between worlds, the vast intelligence behind the door orchestrating its symphony of consumption. He saw Dust Rock not as it was, but as it would be. A wound in reality through which things that should not be would pour into the world. "Fight it," he gasped, reaching for Evelyn with desperate hope. "Remember who you were. Remember." "I remember everything," she said sadly. "That's why I chose this. The pain of being human was too much to bear." She touched his face, and where her fingers met his skin, new burns began to form. But with the pain came visions, not lies, but truth, terrible and complete. The door wasn't malevolent, merely hungry. It offered genuine transformation, genuine power, genuine freedom from mortal constraints. All it asked in return was everything you were. "No," Caleb wrenched away, the effort like tearing his own skin. "There has to be another way." "There is," said a new voice from the doorway. Tom Brennan's sons stood there, James and Pete, armed with shotguns loaded with something that glinted strangely in the lamplight. Behind them, Marcus Webb and a handful of others who still looked human, including Dr. Crenshaw from Carson City, rock salt blessed by the Paiute shamans. Pete explained, firing into the crowd of transformed. Where the salt struck, the creatures recoiled, their forms destabilizing. "Won't kill them, but it hurts like hell," the indigenous peoples knew. "Doctor," Crenshaw added, throwing glass vials that shattered and released smoke smelling of sage and something older. They had ways of fighting this before the first miners broke their seals. The saloon erupted into chaos. The transformed scattered from the blessed salt and sacred smoke, their perfect synchronization breaking down. Redmond and Hartley took advantage of the confusion, overturning tables for cover while returning fire with conventional weapons that at least distracted the enemy. Caleb found himself face to face with Evelyn in the melee. She looked lost, confused, the certainty cracking like a mask. "Caleb, what have I done?" "You were grieving. It used that against you." He caught her hands, ignoring the pain of contact. "But you're still in there. I can see you fighting. It hurts," she whispered. "Being human hurts so much." "I know, God, I know. But that's what makes us real. The pain, the loss, the grief. It's proof we lived, proof we loved." His own burns were spreading rapidly now, the transformation accelerating from prolonged contact. "Come back to me, Evelyn. Choose the pain. Choose to be human." For a moment that lasted eternity. She wavered between states. Then, with a sound like tearing silk, she screamed and collapsed. The otherworldly light faded from her eyes, replaced by very human tears. Around the room, other transformed began to waver. Their connection to whatever powered them disrupted. "The door!" Dandridge's voice boomed from everywhere and nowhere. "If you won't come willingly, you'll come as fuel." The floor began to crack, revealing glimpses of impossible depths. Heat rose from below, not earthly fire, but the cold burn of spaces between stars. The building shook as something vast began to rise. "Everyone out," Redmond commanded. They fled into the street to find Dust Rock in full catastrophe. Buildings collapsed as reality wore thin. Some townsfolk ran screaming while others stood transfixed, watching as the familiar world came apart at the seams. At the town's edge, a wall of transformed citizens blocked escape, herding the living toward the center where Main Street had begun to spiral downward like a drain. "The mine," Webb shouted. "Whatever's happening, it's centered on the mine. We need to—" His words cut off as the ground split open. From the chasm rose something that might once have been the consortium. Henderson, Marsh, and what remained of Dandridge fused into a single entity of borrowed flesh and alien purpose. It spoke with three voices in terrible harmony. "The door opens fully tonight. This town will be the first fruit of a new age. Those who join willingly will rule. Those who resist will fuel the transformation." Behind it, rising from the depths, came the door itself. Not a physical portal, but a wound in existence. Edges bleeding possibility into the world. Through it, Caleb glimpsed landscapes of living fire, cities of bone and dream, spaces where human conception meant nothing. "We need to close it," he said, the words coming from knowledge he didn't understand. "The burns, they're not just marking me. They're making me a key." Evelyn, leaning heavily on his shoulder, nodded weakly. William understood at the end. The door needs anchors in both worlds. That's why it marks people, transforms them. But a key can lock as well as open. "You'll die." "Doctor," Crenshaw said bluntly, "using yourself to seal the door. It'll consume you entirely." Caleb looked at the chaos around them, at good people fighting a losing battle against forces beyond comprehension. He thought of his daughter, of Mary, of all the losses that had brought him to this moment. "Then I'll die meaning something," he said. But as he stepped toward the chasm, Evelyn caught his arm. Not alone, never alone again. She showed him her own hands, burned now, marked by their contact. "The door took William from me. It won't take you too. We do this together." "Evelyn, no. Choice, remember? I choose this. I choose you. I choose to make our pain mean something." Around them, the battle raged. Tom's sons led a group of citizens armed with blessed weapons, holding back the transformed. Redmond and his remaining deputy coordinated resistance, trying to save who they could. But the door continued to widen, and with each passing moment, more of Dust Rock slipped into nightmare. Caleb and Evelyn approached the chasm hand in hand. The consortium thing reared before them, confident in its victory. "You think to seal what has been opened? You are mere sparks before an inferno." Maybe, Caleb admitted. But sparks can start their own fires. He reached out with his burned hands, not to the door but to its frame, the reality it was tearing through. Evelyn added her strength to his, and together they became conduits for something older than the door, older than human memory. The Paiute shamans had known it, had used it to seal the door originally. It was the power of choice, of sacrifice freely given, of love that transcended death. The consortium thing struck at them, but the sacred smoke and blessed salt formed a barrier, held by the determination of ordinary people refusing to surrender their humanity. In that moment, Dust Rock made its choice. Not transformation, but resistance. Not power, but connection. Not eternity, but the precious fragility of mortal life. Caleb felt himself burning, not with alien fire, but with purpose. Beside him, Evelyn blazed too, and their combined light pushed back the darkness. The door began to contract, its edges solidifying, the wound in reality starting to heal. No! The consortium thing lunged forward. But Tom Brennan's sons were there, their blessed weapons tearing into its borrowed flesh. It stumbled, fell, and in falling lost its grip on the forms it had stolen. Henderson, Marsh, and Dandridge separated, aged to dust in seconds as time reclaimed its due. The door fought back, trying to claim Caleb and Evelyn, to transform their sacrifice into fuel for its hunger, but they held firm, pouring everything they were into the seal, around them. The transformed began to collapse, their stolen power returning to its source. Almost there, Evelyn gasped. Just a little more. The ground shuddered. The chasm began to close, and with a sound like the world's last breath, the door slammed shut. The silence that followed was deafening. Where Main Street had spiraled into madness, solid ground remained, though scarred and broken. The transformed lay unconscious but human again. Their ordeal survived, but not without cost. And in the center of it all, where the door had been, Caleb? Evelyn? Redmond approached carefully. They knelt together, still holding hands, but changed. The burns remained but no longer spread, transformed into scars that formed intricate patterns, beautiful in their complexity. They breathed, lived, but something in their eyes spoke of distances traveled, of prices paid. Is it over? Hartley asked. Caleb helped Evelyn to her feet, both of them swaying, but standing. For now, the door is sealed, but... He looked at his scarred hands. We're changed. We'll always hear it calling, always feel the pull. We're the lock now, and locks can be picked. Then we'll stand guard. Tom's son James said firmly. Others nodded agreement, those who'd fought, who'd resisted, who'd chosen humanity over power. Dawn broke over Dust Rock, revealing a town scarred but not broken. The federal government would come, ask questions, demand answers. Some would believe, others would seek rational explanations. But the survivors knew the truth. They'd stood at the threshold of transformation and chosen to remain human, with all the pain and beauty that entailed. In the days that followed, as the town began to rebuild, Caleb and Evelyn worked alongside their neighbors. The scars marked them as different, as those who'd touched eternity and returned. But they wore them without shame. They'd found something worth fighting for, each other, their community, their stubborn humanity. The door might call again. Other towns might face the same choice. But Dust Rock had proven something important, that ordinary people, armed with nothing but determination and salt blessed by wisdom, could stand against the darkness and win. Not a perfect victory, not without cost. But human victories never were, and in that imperfection lay their greatest strength. The gunfight erupted at high noon, when the desert sun stood witness to human courage against inhuman greed. 3 days had passed since the door's sealing. Dust Rock bore its scars, buildings half collapsed, strange burn marks on walls where reality had worn thin, and too many fresh graves in the cemetery. But the town lived, its people working together to rebuild what had been nearly lost. That's when they came. 50 hired guns led by Josiah Whitman, representing Eastern investors who'd backed the consortium. They rode in like a plague of locusts, dust clouds announcing their approach long before their arrival. Whitman himself was a tall scarecrow of a man, dressed in black despite the heat, with eyes like chips of flint. He dismounted in front of the Lucky Strike, where Caleb and Evelyn had been helping board up broken windows. "I'm looking for the federal marshal," Whitman announced, his voice carrying the authority of money and menace. "Got business regarding mineral rights and recent disturbances." Redmond emerged from the sheriff's office, Hartley at his side. The marshal had stayed to help establish order and document the events for his report. Now he faced this new threat with the same calm he'd shown against the transformed. "I'm Marshal Redmond. State your business." Whitman produced a sheaf of papers. "Court orders from Carson City. This town is under quarantine pending investigation of reported plague. My employers have graciously offered to manage the situation, including assuming control of all mining operations for public safety. Let me see those papers." Redmond examined them carefully. These judges, Peterson and Carr, both in the consortium's pocket, according to Morrison's notes. "Careful, Marshal. That sounds like slander against respected jurists." Whitman's smile was all teeth. "Now, you'll withdraw your men and allow us to secure the area, starting with the Garrison mine." "No." Caleb stepped forward, the scars on his hands seeming to pulse with inner light. "That mine stays sealed." Whitman's gaze fixed on him with predatory interest. "Ah, the drifter who bought worthless land. I'm prepared to offer you $10,000 for the deed. More money than you'll see in a lifetime." "Not for sale. Everything's for sale. Mr. Carter. Just a matter of finding the right pressure." Whitman gestured to his men, who spread out with practiced efficiency. "For instance, this saloon, terrible fire hazard. Would be a shame if something happened to it, and its lovely proprietor." Evelyn moved beside Caleb, her own scars visible where her sleeves had rolled up. "You're threatening the wrong people. Mr. Whitman, this town has faced worse than hired thugs." "Have you now?" Whitman studied them both, and something flickered in his flat eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or hunger. "Those marks. You've touched the other side, haven't you? My employers will be very interested in that." That's when Tom Brennan's sons emerged from the crowd that had gathered, along with Webb and 20 other armed townspeople. They'd learned hard lessons about standing together. "Seems you're outnumbered," James said, cradling his shotgun. Whitman laughed. "Boy, I've got 50 professional killers. You've got shopkeepers and miners playing soldier. We've got more than that," Pete replied. "We've got home ground advantage, and we've got them." He nodded toward Caleb and Evelyn. The implication hung in the air. They'd sealed an otherworldly door. What were mere gunmen compared to that? But Whitman had done his research. "Oh, I know all about your miracle. How you closed the precious door. Saved the town from monsters. Thing is, my employers don't want it closed. They want it controlled, harnessed, and they think you two are the key." He signaled his men, who drew weapons with smooth precision. The townspeople responded in kind, and for a moment, Dust Rock balanced on the edge of bloodshed. "Wait." Caleb raised his scarred hands. "You want to open the door again? You saw what happened here. The deaths, the transformations, acceptable losses for unlimited power. The consortium was small-minded, trying to contain something that should be embraced. My employers think bigger." Whitman's eyes gleamed with fanatic fervor. "Imagine armies that can't die, weapons that burn souls instead of bodies, the ability to reshape reality itself. The door isn't a threat. It's America's destiny." "It's madness," Redmond said flatly. "I've seen what that thing does to people. You've seen amateurs fumbling with forces they didn't understand. We'll do better, starting with acquiring the 2 people who successfully interfaced with it." Whitman focused on Caleb and Evelyn again. "Come willingly. Help us understand what you've become. And this town lives. Refuse." He didn't need to finish. The threat hung heavy as desert heat. Caleb felt Evelyn's hand find his, their scars aligning in a way that sent shivers through both of them. In that touch, they shared understanding. The door might be closed, but its influence lingered. They were changed, neither fully human nor transformed, walking a knife's edge between worlds. "You don't understand," Evelyn said quietly. "We're not keys anymore. We're the lock, and if you break us trying to open that door, there won't be anything left to control what comes through. We'll take that risk." "No," Caleb said firmly. "You won't." What happened next would be debated in Dust Rock for generations. Some swore the air itself grew thick, reality bending around the scarred couple. Others claimed to see shadows moving independently, reaching out from angles that shouldn't exist. All agreed on one thing. When Caleb and Evelyn joined their scarred hands and spoke a single word in unison, the world listened. "Leave." The word carried weight beyond sound. Whitman's hired gun stumbled, suddenly uncertain why they'd come to this nowhere town. Their purpose, their pay, their very reasons for existing seemed to slip away like water through fingers. Several simply walked away, expressions blank, forgetting Whitman's promises and threats. Whitman himself stood firm, some inner fire or madness protecting him from the compulsion. "Parlor tricks won't save you, men. Remember your orders. Kill them all if necessary." But his force was fragmenting. The touch of otherness that clung to Dust Rock affected different people differently. Some fled in terror from shadows only they could see. Others stood frozen, caught in visions of burning doors and transformed souls. Only about 20 remained coherent enough to fight, and fight they did. Gunfire erupted across Main Street. Townspeople dove for cover, returning fire with determination born of defending home. Redmond and Hartley coordinated the defense with military precision, while Tom's sons led groups in flanking maneuvers through buildings scarred by recent catastrophe. Caleb pulled Evelyn behind an overturned wagon as bullets whined overhead. His scars burned, not with pain, but with awareness. He could feel the violence disturbing something deeper, threatening to crack the seal they'd sacrificed so much to create. "We need to end this quickly," Evelyn said, understanding the danger. "Before—" A scream cut through the gunfire. One of Whitman's men had gotten too close to the sealed mine entrance, where reality remained thin. His hand passed through what looked like solid stone, and something on the other side pulled. His scream rose in pitch as his arm elongated impossibly, stretching like taffy between worlds. "Pull him back." Whitman ordered. But it was too late. With a wet sound that would haunt witnesses' dreams, the gunman vanished into stone that rippled like water before solidifying again. The sight broke something in the attacking force. These were hard men, killers who'd faced death without flinching. But this was beyond death. This was unmaking. Dissolution. A fate that made bullets seem merciful. "Stand and fight," Whitman raged, shooting one of his own fleeing men. "Cowards, we're so close." But the tide had turned. Townspeople pressed their advantage, and federal authority added its weight. One by one, Whitman's remaining men surrendered or fell. Soon, only the man himself remained, standing in the middle of Main Street like a scarecrow defying a storm. "You fools," he snarled, blood running from a graze on his temple. "You think you've won? My employers have resources you can't imagine. They'll come with armies, with federal backing, with every power money can buy. That door will open again. And when it does—" His words cut off as Caleb approached. The scars on his hands glowed faintly, and when he spoke, his voice carried echoes of the space beyond the door. "Your employers, tell me their names." Whitman tried to resist, but the compulsion was too strong. Names spilled from his lips. Industrialists, politicians, men of power who saw the door as a path to godhood. Each name burned itself into the air, witnessed by the crowd and by something deeper that recorded such things. "They'll come for you," Whitman gasped when the compulsion released him. "You can't fight the future. Maybe not," Caleb admitted. "But we can shape it." He turned to Redmond. "Marshal, I believe this man just confessed to conspiracy, attempted murder, and plans for what amounts to treason against reality itself. I heard it too, Redmond said grimly. Mr. Whitman, you're under arrest, and those names you mentioned, they'll be receiving federal attention real soon. As Hartley cuffed the broken man, Evelyn addressed the crowd. This won't be the last. The door calls to those who hunger for power. They'll come with different faces, different schemes, but the same goal. We need to be ready. Then we'll be ready, Tom's son James declared. Others voiced agreement. They'd survive transformation and assault. They could survive whatever came next. In the aftermath, as wounded were tended and dead counted, Caleb found himself standing with Evelyn at the spot where the door had been. The ground bore scars, geometric patterns burned into stone, marking where worlds had briefly merged. Whitman was right about one thing, Evelyn said quietly. We are changed, neither human nor other, but something between. What if that change spreads? What if we're the beginning of something new? Caleb considered this, feeling the weight of possibilities. Then we make sure it's something worth becoming. The door offered transformation without choice, power without responsibility. We can offer something different. A middle path? A human path. Changed but not consumed. Connected to something greater but still choosing who we are. He smiled sadly. It won't be easy. We'll always hear the door calling, always feel the pull of what we almost became. But we'll face it together. She leaned into him, their scars aligning, creating patterns of light that spoke of sealed doors and choices made. That has to count for something. Around them, Dust Rock continued its resurrection. Buildings rose from rubble, hope from despair. The town had faced annihilation and chosen humanity. Now it would stand as guardian and example, proof that even the smallest places could shape destiny. The door remained closed, but its influence lingered, in the scars of those who'd sealed it, in the memories of those who'd witnessed transformation, in the knowledge that reality had boundaries that could be crossed. Other doors existed. Caleb knew. Other towns would face the choice. But for now, Dust Rock stood firm. Its people had learned the price of power and the value of remaining human. They'd fought with blessed salt and stubborn courage against forces beyond comprehension and won. Not a perfect victory. 23 dead, dozens wounded, scars both physical and spiritual that would never fully heal. But they'd proven something important, that ordinary people could stand against the darkness, that love could seal what greed had opened, that choosing to be human was its own form of power. As the sun set over the scarred landscape, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Caleb and Evelyn walked hand in hand through their town. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, federal investigations, the consortium's desperate survivors, the eternal temptation of the door. But tonight, Dust Rock lived. Its people laughed and mourned, rebuilt and remembered, loved and lost and chose to continue despite it all. And in that choosing, in that stubborn insistence on remaining human despite touching the infinite, lay their greatest victory. The door might whisper, power might tempt, but Dust Rock had made its choice. Written in blood and blessed salt, sealed with sacrifice and affirmed with every sunrise. They would remain human, no matter the cost, no matter the call. They would remain human, and that, more than any other worldly power, would be their legacy. Dawn broke over Dust Rock like a benediction, painting the scarred landscape in shades of rose and gold. 6 months had passed since the door's sealing, since the gunfight that had decided the town's fate. The physical wounds had mostly healed, buildings rebuilt stronger than before, but the deeper changes remained. Caleb Carter stood at the entrance to the Garrison Mine, now permanently sealed with concrete and blessed silver. The scars on his hands had faded to fine white lines that caught the morning light, creating patterns that seemed to shift when viewed directly. Beside him, Evelyn held a bouquet of desert wildflowers, purple lupine and golden poppies that had sprouted in abundance after the winter rains. "Ready?" she asked, her own scars barely visible beneath the sleeves of her wedding dress. It had been her idea to hold the ceremony here, at the place where they'd nearly lost everything and found each other instead. The whole town had turned out, transforming the barren ground into something beautiful with ribbons and bunting, tables laden with food, and music that drifted on the clean desert air. Marshal Redmond had stayed to officiate, having taken a territorial position to help coordinate the ongoing investigation into what the newspapers carefully called the Dust Rock Incident. He stood now in his best uniform, a Bible in one hand and a deputy's star in the other, the one he'd given Caleb officially last month. "Dearly beloved," Redmond began, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "We gather here at a place of ending and beginning, where two souls walked through fire and chose to emerge hand in hand. Tom Brennan's sons stood as groomsmen, their faces showing the maturity that came from surviving the impossible. Webb served as best man, his gruff demeanor softened by genuine emotion. The crowd included faces both familiar and new, survivors who'd stayed to rebuild and newcomers drawn by stories of a town that had faced hell and won. The traditional vows speak of sickness and health, richer and poorer. Redmond continued, "But you two have already walked through far more than most couples face in a lifetime. You've seen each other at the edge of transformation, chosen humanity when godhood was offered, sealed a door that should never have been opened. What words could encompass that?" Caleb took Evelyn's hands, feeling the familiar spark where their scars aligned. "I don't have fancy words," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I know this. When I came to Dust Rock, I was running toward death. You gave me a reason to choose life instead. Not just survival, but actual living, building something worth defending." Evelyn's eyes shimmered with tears. "And you showed me that grief doesn't have to consume us, that we can carry our dead with love instead of letting loss transform us into something inhuman. Together, we're more than the sum of our scars." "The rings," Redmond prompted. Pete Brennan stepped forward with two simple gold bands, forged from Nevada gold and inscribed with symbols the Paiute shamans had shared: protection, binding, and choice. As Caleb slipped the ring onto Evelyn's finger, a warm breeze swept across the gathering, carrying the scent of sage and something deeper, older, approving. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Nevada and the witnesses gathered here," Redmond declared, "I pronounce you husband and wife. What was broken has been remade. What was scattered has been gathered. What was nearly lost has been found." Their kiss tasted of promises and desert sunshine, of doors closed and new ones opening. The crowd erupted in cheers, the sound rolling across the valley like thunder announcing rain after drought. The celebration that followed was everything Dust Rock needed, a declaration that life continued, that joy could bloom in scarred ground. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by every household. Musicians played while couples danced on boards laid over the desert floor. Children who'd witnessed horror now laughed and played, their resilience a testament to human adaptability. As the sun climbed toward noon, Caleb found himself in conversation with Dr. Crenshaw, who'd moved to Dust Rock to study the after-effects of the door's influence. "The changes are stabilizing," the doctor reported. "Those who were touched but not transformed show increased resistance to disease, faster healing, occasional moments of enhanced perception, nothing that compromises their humanity, but enough to mark them as different. Different enough to be feared? Perhaps, but also different enough to stand guard. Other sites have been identified, places where the boundary grows thin. The government is quietly recruiting those who survived Dust Rock to help monitor them." Caleb nodded. He'd suspected as much. The door here was sealed, but the knowledge of such things couldn't be contained. Better to prepare than to pretend. "Deputy Carter," a young voice called. Jenny Patterson, daughter of the woman who'd walked through walls during the transformation, ran up clutching a telegram. "This just came from Carson City." Caleb read it quickly, then found Evelyn in the crowd. "The investigation's concluded. Whitman's employers have been arrested. Senate hearings are being convened about unnatural resources and their exploitation. Looks like the fight's moving to different ground." "Good," she said firmly. "Let them argue in courtrooms instead of opening doors better left closed." As afternoon shadows lengthened, the newlyweds made their rounds, accepting congratulations and well wishes. Each handshake and embrace carried weight. These weren't just neighbors, but fellow survivors. Bonded by shared experience no outsider could fully understand. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Caleb and Evelyn stood together where the door had been. The geometric scars in the stone had faded, but not vanished. A permanent reminder of prices paid and choices made. "Do you still hear it?" Evelyn asked quietly. The calling. Sometimes, in the deep night, when the world grows thin. But it's different now, distant, like an echo of an echo. He drew her close. "What about you?" "The same. We'll always be marked, won't we? Always stand between. Someone has to, and I can't think of anyone I'd rather stand with." They turned back toward the celebration, where lanterns were being lit against the approaching dusk. Dust Rock spread before them, scarred but thriving, wounded but whole. In 6 months, it had transformed from a dying mining town to something unique, a community that had touched the impossible and chosen to remain human. As they walked hand in hand toward their future, the burned patterns beneath their feet seemed to pulse once with warmth, not the cold fire of the door, but something different, welcoming. The seal held firm, strengthened by love and witnessed by stars. Behind them, the garrison mine stood silent sentinel, its concrete cap decorated now with flowers and ribbons from the wedding. What lay beneath would always be there, waiting, calling to those who hungered for power without price. But as long as people like Caleb and Evelyn stood guard, as long as communities like Dust Rock remembered the cost of transformation, the door would remain closed. The drifter had bought the abandoned mine for $10. What he'd found beneath had burned forever, not in endless torment, but as an eternal reminder that some prices were too high to pay. He'd found horror and wonder, death and transformation, loss and unexpected love. Most importantly, he'd found home. As the wedding celebration continued into the night, with music and laughter echoing across the desert, 2 scarred souls began their new life together. They carried the weight of what they'd seen and done, but they carried it together. And in that sharing, that choice to face the darkness hand in hand, lay humanity's greatest strength. The door might whisper. Other hungry things might scratch at reality's edges. But Dust Rock would be ready. Its people forever changed, but forever human, standing guard at the threshold between worlds. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining me on this journey through the haunted desert of Dust Rock. I hope Caleb and Evelyn's story has touched your heart as much as it has mine. Where are you listening to this tale right now? Please share in the comments below. Whether you're driving through your own desert highway, sitting by a cozy fire, or perhaps working the late shift like our brave miners. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories of love, courage, and the supernatural frontier. Share your thoughts about what you would have chosen when faced with the burning door. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward the sunset, and remember, sometimes the greatest treasure isn't gold or power, but the person standing beside you when the world turns strange.